Episode 2, The Reno Brothers, American Outlaws. A fictional western based on a true story of a real outlaw gang and their lawless adventures in the Wild West. From their humble beginnings in Indiana to becoming the first notorious train robbers in American history. Follow the rise and fall of Frank, John, Sim, and Bill Reno. This is a tale of brotherhood, betrayal, and the desperate choices that turned ordinary men into legends. Listen now. Chapter 1. The Weight of a Name. The rain let up by midday, leaving the world washed and shining, every leaf and blade of grass slick with silver. I stood at the edge of the yard, boots sinking into the soft earth, and watched the river swell against its banks. The air was thick with the scent of wet clay and wild onion, and somewhere a woodpecker hammered at a dead tree, the sound sharp and insistent. Frank was in the barn, his silhouette framed by the open doors, shoulders hunched as he worked a rasp over the blade of a shovel. The rasp sang with each stroke, metal on metal, a sound that set my teeth on edge. I could see the tension in his back, the way his muscles bunched beneath his shirt. He was always working, always moving, as if he could outrun the weight that pressed down on all of us. I walked over, the mud sucking at my boots, and leaned against the doorframe. The barn smelled of old hay and horse sweat, the air warm and close. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that slanted through the cracks in the boards. Frank didn't look up. "You ever think about leaving, John?" he asked, his voice low, almost lost beneath the rasp. I hesitated, the question settling between us like a stone. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But where would we go? The world's not made for men like us." He set the shovel aside, wiping his hands on a rag. His face was shadowed, eyes dark and unreadable. "Maybe not, but I get tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of folks whispering our name like it's a curse." I knew what he meant. In Rockford, the Reno name was a weight we all carried, heavy as a sack of wet grain. Folks remembered every slight, every fight, every scrape with the law. They watched us with wary eyes, waiting for us to slip. Sim appeared in the doorway, his hair wild, cheeks flushed from running. He grinned, but there was a nervous edge to it. "Sheriff's in town," he said. "Saw him talking to Mr. Harlan at the store. Didn't look friendly." Frank's jaw tightened. "He's never friendly." Sim shrugged, but his eyes darted to the shadows in the barn. "Heard him say something about the railroad, about men going missing, money gone. Folks are scared." I felt a chill, despite the warmth of the barn. The railroad had changed everything, brought strangers, money, and trouble in equal measure. It was a vein of iron running through the heart of our land, pulsing with danger. Frank picked up the shovel again, his knuckles white. "We keep our heads down. We don't give them a reason to come looking." Sim snorted, kicking at a pile of straw. "Doesn't matter what we do. They'll always find a reason." I watched my brothers, the way the light caught in Frank's hair, the restless energy in Sim's movements. I thought of Bill, still a boy in so many ways, and Ma, her hands raw from work, her eyes always searching the horizon. The barn felt smaller suddenly, the air thick with old memories and new fears. I could taste the dust on my tongue, feel the rough wood of the door beneath my palm. Frank's voice broke the silence, softer now. "We stick together. That's all that matters." I nodded, the words settling in my chest, warm and solid. Whatever the world thought of us, whatever names they called us, we were brothers. Blood and bone, bound by more than just the land beneath our feet. Sim grinned, the old mischief flickering in his eyes. "Let him talk. We'll give him something to talk about." We laughed then, the sound echoing off the rafters, bright and defiant. For a moment, the weight of our name felt lighter, the world outside the barn a little less threatening. But as the sun slipped behind the clouds and the shadows lengthened, I knew the peace wouldn't last. The river would rise, the railroad would bring more trouble, and the Reno name would carry us forward. Into darkness or into legend, I couldn't yet say. I only knew that when the time came, we would face it together, the four of us standing shoulder to shoulder against whatever storm the world sent our way. Chapter 2. The Scent of Risk. The days after the train job passed in a hush, as if the whole world was holding its breath. The air in Rockford was thick with suspicion, every neighbor's glance a little too long, every greeting edged with something sharp. Even the birds seemed quieter, their songs swallowed by the heavy summer heat. We gathered in the barn one evening, the sun bleeding red through the cracks in the boards, painting stripes across the dust. The air inside was close, heavy with the scent of old hay and the tang of horse sweat. I could taste the salt of my own nerves on my lips, feel the prickle of anticipation in my skin. Frank stood at the workbench, a battered map of Indiana spread before him, corners weighted with horseshoes and a rusted lantern. His face was set, eyes narrowed, the lines at the corners deepening in the fading light. Sim lounged on a hay bale, whittling a stick, shavings curling at his feet. Bill hovered near the door, arms crossed, chewing his thumbnail raw. Frank tapped the map, his voice low and steady. Jonesville, post office. They're holding the payroll for the mill. Maybe $3,000 waiting for pickup. No Pinkertons, just old man Dorsey and his boy. Sim's knife paused mid-whittle, a grin spreading across his face. Easy pickings, then. Frank shot him a look. Nothing's easy. Not anymore. I stepped closer, the lantern's glow warming my face. The map was smudged with fingerprints. The ink faded, but I could see the route clear in my mind. The river winding south, the road cutting through fields of corn and wild rye, the little square of Jonesville nestled at the crossroads. Bill's voice was thin, uncertain. What if they're expecting us? Folks talk, word gets around. Frank's jaw tightened. We move quick, in and out before anyone knows we're there. Sim, you take the back, watch for trouble. Bill, you stay with the horses. John, you're with me. The plan settled over us, heavy as a blanket. I felt the old thrill, sharp and sweet, but beneath it was a new edge, a fear that tasted like iron and smoke. The last job had changed us. We moved differently now, spoke in whispers, watched the shadows for movement. Sim flicked his knife closed, the sound loud in the hush. When? Frank glanced at the window, where the sky was bruising to purple. Tomorrow night, after midnight. We ride light. No guns unless we have to. I nodded, feeling the weight of the decision settle in my bones. The barn seemed to close in around us, the air thick with secrets and sweat. I could hear the horses shifting in their stalls, the soft clop of hooves, the rustle of straw. Bill's eyes were wide, his breath quick. I reached out, squeezing his shoulder, feeling the tremor in his muscles. We'll be careful, I said, the words more for myself than for him. Frank rolled up the map, his movements precise. Get some rest, we'll need it. We slipped out into the night, the grass cool and wet beneath our boots, the air humming with the promise of rain. The house glowed warm in the distance, Ma's lamp a beacon in the dark. I paused at the edge of the yard, breathing in the scent of honeysuckle and wood smoke, the taste of risk sharp on my tongue. Inside, the house was quiet. Ma sat by the window, her knitting forgotten in her lap, her eyes fixed on the road. She looked up as I entered, her gaze searching my face, seeing more than I wanted her to. Another long night? She asked, her voice soft. I nodded, unable to meet her eyes. Just restless, Ma. She reached out, her hand rough and warm, and squeezed mine. You boys be careful. The world's changing. Not always for the better. I swallowed hard, the words catching in my throat. We will, Ma, I promise. Upstairs, I lay awake, listening to the house settle around me. The creak of the rafters, the soft sigh of the wind through the shutters. My mind spun with plans and fears. The memory of Frank's voice, the look in Bill's eyes, the scent of the barn still clinging to my clothes. Tomorrow, we would ride for Jonesville. The risk was real, the danger close, but the promise of freedom, of something more than this small, watchful life, burned in my chest like a brand. I closed my eyes, letting the darkness settle over me, and dreamed of open roads, of gold coins and green fields, of a world where the Reno name meant something more than fear. But even in my dreams, I could feel the weight of what we were about to do, the taste of risk sharp and unyielding on my tongue. Chapter 3. Night Ride to Jonesville. The night we rode for Jonesville, the moon was a thin, broken coin, barely enough to see by. The world was a patchwork of shadow and silver, the fields whispering with the wind and the hush of our horses' hooves. I could taste the coolness of the air, sharp as mint, and the tang of leather from the reins, slick with sweat in my hands. We left Rockford in silence, slipping through the sleeping town like ghosts. The houses were dark, windows shuttered tight, but I felt eyes on us all the same, neighbors who knew too much or maybe just guessed. The road south was rutted and soft from the last rain, the mud sucking at the horses' hooves, the scent of wet earth rising with every step. Frank led, his back straight, his silhouette black against the pale sky. He rode with a purpose, every movement measured, his eyes always searching the horizon. I followed close, the rhythm of my horse's gait steadying my nerves. Sim brought up the rear, his hat pulled low, a restless energy in the way he shifted in the saddle. Bill rode beside me, his breath coming quick and shallow, his hands clenched tight on the reins. We didn't speak. The only sounds were the creak of leather, the soft snort of a horse, the distant call of a whippoorwill. My mind spun with the plan, every step, every turn, every word Frank had spoken in the barn. I replayed it over and over, trying to smooth the edges of my fear. The road narrowed as we neared Jonesville, the trees pressing close, their branches arching overhead like the ribs of some great beast. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp moss, the darkness alive with the rustle of unseen creatures. My heart thudded in my chest, each beat loud as a drum. Frank signaled, a quick flick of his hand, and we reined in just outside town. The post office was a squat, whitewashed building at the crossroads, its windows dark, the sign creaking in the breeze. A single lamp burned inside, throwing a pool of yellow light onto the porch. Sim slipped from his horse, moving like a shadow, and circled around back. Bill stayed with the horses, his face pale in the moonlight, his eyes wide and watchful. Frank and I crept forward, boots muffled in the thick grass, the night pressing close around us. I could hear my own breathing, harsh and ragged, the blood rushing in my ears. The porch boards creaked under our weight, the sound loud as a gunshot. Frank's hand was steady on the door, his voice a whisper. "Ready?" I nodded, swallowing hard, the taste of fear bitter on my tongue. He eased the door open, the hinges groaning. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old paper and lamp oil, the warmth of the stove lingering in the corners. Old man Dorsey sat behind the counter, his head nodding, spectacles slipping down his nose. His son, a boy not much older than Bill, dozed in a chair by the stove, his boots propped on the hearth. Frank moved fast, crossing the room in 3 long strides. He pressed the barrel of his pistol to the counter, his voice low and cold. "Don't move." Dorsey jerked awake, his eyes wide, mouth opening in a silent O. The boy scrambled to his feet, but I was there, blocking the door, my own pistol drawn, though my hands shook. Frank's voice was calm, almost gentle. "We don't want trouble. Open the safe." Dorsey's hands trembled as he fumbled with the keys, the metal jangling in the quiet. The safe was small, battered, the paint worn thin. When the door swung open, the smell of ink and money filled the room. Crisp bills, stacks of coins, the promise of a new life. Frank filled the sack, his movements quick and sure. I watched the boy, his face pale, his eyes darting between us. I saw the fear there, the same fear I felt, and for a moment I wanted to say something, to promise it would be all right. But the words stuck in my throat. Sim appeared at the back door, his grin wild in the lamplight. "All clear." Frank nodded, slinging the sack over his shoulder. "Stay quiet," he told Dorsey, "and no one gets hurt." We slipped out into the night, the cool air hitting my face like a slap. Bill was waiting, his hands white-knuckled on the reins. We mounted up, the horses stamping and snorting, eager to run. We rode hard, the wind tearing at our coats, the world blurring past in streaks of shadow and moonlight. My heart pounded, the taste of adrenaline sharp and sweet. Behind us, Jonesville slept on, the secret of what we'd done settling over the town like a shroud. By the time we reached the edge of Rockford, the sky was paling, the first birds calling in the hedgerows. My muscles ached, my throat raw from the cold air, but inside I felt a wild, reckless joy, a sense of power, of freedom, of being alive in a way I'd never known before. Frank led us home, his face unreadable in the dawn light. Sim laughed, the sound bright and sharp, echoing across the fields. Bill rode in silence, his eyes fixed on the horizon, his jaw set. We slipped into the barn, the smell of hay and horses wrapping around us safe and familiar. Frank stashed the sack beneath the floorboards, his hands steady, his eyes hard. We stood together in the half-light, the taste of risk still on our tongues, the memory of the night burning in our blood. I looked at my brothers, Frank, Sim, Bill, and felt the bond between us, fierce and unbreakable. Outside, the sun rose over Rockford, painting the world in gold and shadow. Inside, we were changed by what we'd done, by what we'd become. And as I breathed in the scent of hay and sweat and fear, I knew there was no turning back. Chapter 4. The Quiet After. Dawn crept over Rockford slow and pale, the sky streaked with the faintest blush of pink. I stood in the barn's open doorway, the cool air prickling my skin, the scent of dew and manure thick in my nose. My hands still trembled from the ride, from the memory of the post office's lamplight and the fear in Dorsey's eyes. The world felt hushed, as if the fields and fences themselves were holding their breath. Inside, Frank crouched by the loose floorboard, tucking the sack of money deep into the shadows. His movements were careful, almost reverent, as if he were handling something sacred or dangerous, maybe both. The coins clinked softly, a sound that seemed to echo in the hush. Sim leaned against a stall, his hat tipped back, a wild grin still playing at the corners of his mouth. "Did you see the look on that old man's face?" Sim whispered, his voice bright with leftover adrenaline. "Thought he was going to faint dead away." Frank shot him a look sharp as a knife. "Don't gloat. We were lucky, that's all." Sim shrugged, but his eyes sparkled. "Luck's just another word for being smarter than the other fella." Bill sat on a bale of hay, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. He hadn't said a word since we left Jonesville, and now he looked up at me, his face pale and drawn, eyes rimmed red. I could see the tremor in his fingers, the way his breath came shallow and quick. I knelt beside him, the straw scratching at my knees. "You did good, Bill. We all did." He shook his head, voice barely a whisper. "That boy? He looked scared, John, like he thought we'd shoot him." I remembered the boy's face, the way his hands had fluttered at his sides, the way his eyes had darted to the pistol in my hand. I remembered, too, the way my own heart had hammered, the way my mouth had gone dry. I wanted to tell Bill it would get easier, that the fear would fade, but I wasn't sure it was true. Frank straightened, dusting his hands on his trousers. "We lay low. No spending, no talk. Not for a while." Sim rolled his eyes, but he didn't argue. He wandered to the barn door, peering out at the waking world. The sun was higher now, gilding the tops of the corn and setting the river aglow. The air was thick with the promise of heat, the kind that would make the fields shimmer and the cicadas sing. I felt the exhaustion settle into my bones, heavy and deep. My clothes were damp with sweat, my boots caked with mud. I could taste the night still, lamp oil, fear, the metallic tang of coins on my tongue. We slipped into the house one by one, careful not to wake Ma. The kitchen was cool and dim, the table set for breakfast, the smell of yeast and coffee lingering in the air. I poured a cup, the warmth seeping into my hands, the bitterness grounding me. Frank sat across from me, his eyes shadowed, his face drawn. He looked older in the morning light, the lines at his mouth deeper, the weight of what we'd done pressing down on him. Sim slouched in a chair, feet up, humming a tune under his breath. Bill hovered by the window, watching the road, his shoulders hunched. Ma came in, her hair pulled back, her eyes sharp. She looked at each of us in turn, her gaze lingering on Bill. She didn't ask questions, she never did, but I saw the worry in the set of her mouth, the way her hands tightened on the coffee pot. "Eat," she said, setting a plate of bread and eggs on the table. "You boys look half-starved." We ate in silence, the only sounds the scrape of forks and the distant call of a rooster. The bread was warm, the butter melting into golden pools, the eggs soft and rich. I let the food fill me, tried to let it push away the memory of the night, the fear, the thrill. After breakfast, Frank and I went out to the porch. The boards were warm beneath my feet, the sun bright on my face. I watched the road, the fields, the slow drift of clouds across the sky. The world looked unchanged, but I knew better. Something had shifted, deep and permanent, like a stone dropped in a still pond. Frank lit a cigarette, the smoke curling around his head. He didn't speak for a long time, just watched the horizon, his eyes distant. "We can't keep this up forever," he said finally, his voice rough. "Sooner or later, someone's going to come looking." I nodded, the truth of it settling in my chest. The quiet after a job was always the hardest, waiting for the world to catch up, for the law to come knocking, for the fear to fade or turn to something else. But for now, the sun was warm, the coffee strong, and my brothers close. For now, we were safe. I closed my eyes, letting the light wash over me, and tried to believe it would last. Chapter 5. The Echoes of Guilt. The days after Jonesville passed in a strange, uneasy quiet. The world outside our windows was all summer brightness, fields shimmering with heat, the river running slow and green, the air thick with the hum of cicadas. But inside, the house felt different, as if the walls themselves were listening, waiting for the next knock at the door. I spent my mornings in the fields, the sun burning my neck, sweat stinging my eyes. The corn was tall, the leaves sharp as knives, and every step through the rows felt like wading through a green sea. I tried to lose myself in the rhythm of work, the scrape of the hoe, the rustle of stalks, the earthy scent of soil and growing things, but my mind kept drifting back to the post office, to the fear in Dorsey's eyes, to the way the coins had felt in my hands, cold and heavy. Frank kept busy too, fixing fences, mending harnesses, his hands always moving. But I saw the way he paused sometimes, staring off toward the road, his jaw clenched, his eyes shadowed. At night he'd sit on the porch, a cigarette glowing between his fingers, the smoke curling up into the dark. I'd join him sometimes, the boards cool beneath us, the air thick with the scent of tobacco and honeysuckle. Sim was restless, unable to settle. He'd disappear for hours, coming back with mud on his boots and a wild look in his eyes. He talked louder than usual, laughed too hard, but there was a sharpness to it, a brittle edge. I caught him one afternoon in the barn, tossing a coin in the air, watching it spin and fall over and over. His hands shook just a little. Bill was the worst off. He barely ate, barely spoke. He spent his days in the orchard, sitting beneath the old apple tree, carving shapes into the bark with his pocket knife. Sometimes I'd find him there, his face streaked with tears, his shoulders hunched. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him it would pass, but the words felt hollow in my mouth. Ma watched us all, her eyes sharp and sad. She moved through the house with a quiet purpose, her hands busy with bread dough and laundry, but I saw the worry in the lines of her face, the way she lingered at the window, watching the road. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the trees and the sky turned the color of bruised plums, we gathered on the porch. The air was thick with the scent of cut grass and wood smoke, the first stars pricking through the haze. Frank sat on the steps, elbows on his knees, staring at the dirt. Sim leaned against the railing, whittling a stick, the shavings piling at his feet. Bill hovered in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the horizon. I broke the silence, my voice rough. "You think they'll come?" "The law." Frank didn't look up. "They always do, sooner or later." Sim snorted, flicking his shavings into the yard. "Let 'em come. We'll be ready." But his bravado rang hollow, and we all heard it. The fear was there, just beneath the surface, sharp and raw. Bill spoke, his voice barely more than a whisper. I keep seeing his face. That boy. He looked at me like I was a monster. I felt the ache in his words, the guilt that gnawed at all of us. I remembered the boy's wide eyes, the way his hands had trembled. I remembered my own fear, the way it had tasted, bitter, metallic, impossible to swallow. Frank finally looked up, his eyes tired. "We did what we had to. Doesn't mean we have to like it." The porch fell silent again, the only sound the distant call of a whippoorwill, the soft creak of the boards beneath us. The night pressed close, thick with the scent of rain and regret. Ma came out, her apron dusted with flour, her hands gentle as she touched Bill's shoulder. "Come inside, boys. It's late." We followed her in, the kitchen warm and bright, the table set for supper. The bread was fresh, the butter soft, the stew rich with onions and salt pork. We ate in silence, the food filling the hollow places inside us, the warmth a small comfort against the cold that lingered in our hearts. Afterward, I lay in bed, the window open to the night, the air cool on my skin. I listened to the sounds of the house, Frank's slow, steady breathing, Sim's restless tossing, Bill's quiet sobs muffled by his pillow. I closed my eyes and tried to remember a time before the fear, before the guilt, before the world had changed. But all I could feel was the weight of what we'd done, pressing down on me heavy as a stone, and I knew even as I drifted towards sleep that the echoes of guilt would follow us, no matter how far we ran. Chapter 6. The Flicker of Temptation. The heat broke at last, and the air turned cool and restless, carrying the scent of rain and the promise of change. The fields outside Rockford glistened with dew in the early morning, and the sky was a pale, washed blue, streaked with the last wisps of night. But inside the house, the tension was thick as ever, a heaviness that clung to our skin and soured every word. Frank called us to the barn after supper, his voice low and urgent. The sun was sinking, painting the world in gold and shadow, and the barn was filled with the smell of hay and horses, the dust swirling in the slanting light. I could feel the anticipation in the air, sharp and electric, prickling along my arms. Frank spread a crumpled sheet of paper on the workbench, a rough sketch of Jonesville, the main street marked with a heavy black line. He tapped the spot where the general store sat, right at the crossroads, its porch sagging, its windows always glowing with lamplight after dark. "They keep the week's receipts in the safe," Frank said, his voice steady but tight. "Owner locks up just after sundown, but he stays late, counting the till. No one else around. If we move quick, we're in and out before anyone's the wiser." Sim grinned, his eyes glinting in the half-light. "Easy as pie. That old man's half-blind and his wife's deaf as a post." Bill shifted from foot to foot, his face pale, his hands twisting in his shirt. "What if someone sees us? What if the sheriff's close by?" Frank's gaze softened, just a little. "We'll watch the road. Sim, you take the alley behind the store. Keep an eye out. Bill, you stay with the horses, same as last time. John, you're with me." I nodded, feeling the familiar mix of dread and excitement settle in my gut. The plan was simple, but the risk was real. The memory of the post office job still lingered. Dorsey's trembling hands, the boy's wide eyes, the way guilt had tasted in my mouth for days after. Frank's eyes met mine, steady and searching. "We do this clean. No guns unless we have to. No one gets hurt." The barn was quiet. The only sound the soft snort of a horse, the creak of a leather strap. I could smell the sweet rot of old hay, the sharp tang of sweat and fear. My heart thudded in my chest, each beat loud as a drum. Sim clapped me on the back, his laughter bright and brittle. "Don't look so grim, John. We'll be home before Ma's lamp burns out." But I saw the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed against his thigh. We were all feeling it, the pull of temptation, the fear of what might come. We spent the afternoon preparing, moving through the motions with a practiced quiet. I checked the horses, running my hands over their flanks, feeling the warmth of their bodies, the steady thump of their hearts. Bill helped me, his silence heavy, his eyes darting to the road every few minutes. As dusk fell, we rode out, the world soft and blue, the air cool against our faces. The road to Jonesville was empty, the fields whispering with the sound of crickets and the distant call of a whippoorwill. My hands were slick on the reins, the leather tasting salty and bitter when I licked my lips. We reached the edge of town just as the last light faded, the general store's windows glowing yellow in the gloom. The street was quiet, the only movement the slow swing of a sign in the breeze, the faint clatter of a shutter somewhere down the block. Sim slipped into the alley, his shadow melting into the darkness. Bill stayed with the horses, his face pinched and anxious, his breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. Frank and I crept to the side door, our footsteps muffled on the packed dirt. Inside, the store was warm and close, the air thick with the smell of flour and molasses, lamp oil, and old wood. The owner sat at the counter, his spectacles perched on his nose, his hands moving slow and methodical as he counted coins into neat stacks. The safe sat open behind him, its mouth dark and hungry. Frank moved first, his voice low and calm. "Evening, Mr. Harlan. Sorry to trouble you?" The old man looked up, surprise flickering across his face. Before he could speak, Frank stepped forward, his hand resting on the counter, his eyes steady. "We don't want trouble, just the money." I watched the owner's hands, the way they trembled, the way his breath caught in his throat. I could feel the tension in the room, thick and humming, the taste of fear sharp on my tongue. Frank filled the sack with bills and coins, his movements quick and sure. I kept watch, my heart pounding, every creak and groan of the building magnified in my ears. The lamplight flickered, casting long shadows across the shelves, making the jars and tins glint like gold. When it was done, Frank nodded to the old man, his voice gentle. "Stay here. Count to 100 before you move." We slipped out into the night, the cool air hitting my face like a blessing. Sim was waiting in the alley, his eyes wide, his breath coming fast. Bill had the horses ready, his hands shaking as he passed me the reins. We rode hard, the wind tearing at our coats, the world blurring past in streaks of shadow and moonlight. My muscles ached, my throat raw from the cold air, but inside, I felt that wild, dangerous joy again. A sense of power, of freedom, of being alive in a way I'd never known before. Back at the barn, we hid the money, our hands moving quick and careful. The air was thick with the scent of sweat and hay, the taste of victory and fear mingling on my tongue. We stood together in the darkness, the echoes of what we'd done ringing in our ears. I looked at my brothers, Frank, steady and silent, Sim, wild-eyed and grinning, Bill, pale and shaken, and felt the bond between us fierce and unbreakable. Outside, the world was quiet, the night deep and endless. Inside, we were changed. Again. And as I breathed in the scent of hay and sweat and hope, I knew the line between right and wrong had blurred, and there was no turning back. Chapter 7. The Knock at the Door. The morning after the Jonesville job, the world felt sharper. Every sound and color turned up too bright. The sun rose hard and gold, burning the mist off the fields, and the air was thick with the scent of cut grass and wood smoke. I stood at the kitchen window, mug of coffee cradled in my hands, watching the road with a knot in my gut. The coffee was bitter, scalding my tongue, but I drank it anyway, needing something to hold on to. Inside, the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. Ma moved through the kitchen with careful purpose, her skirts whispering against the floor, her hands steady as she kneaded bread. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes flicked to the window every few minutes. She didn't ask questions, but she knew. She always knew. Frank came in from the yard, boots muddy, face set and unreadable. He nodded to me, then sat at the table, rubbing his hands together as if he could scrub away the worry. Sim followed, his energy wound tight, eyes darting from the door to the window and back again. Bill trailed behind, pale and silent, his gaze fixed on the floor. We ate in silence, the only sounds the scrape of forks and the soft thud of Ma's hands on the dough. The bread was warm, the butter melting into golden pools, but I barely tasted it. My mind was on the road, on the memory of the old man's trembling hands, on the way the lamplight had flickered in the store. It was near noon when we heard the hoofbeats, slow, deliberate, the sound carrying through the open window. My heart leapt into my throat. Frank's eyes met mine, and in that moment I saw the same fear, the same readiness. Sim's hand drifted to the knife at his belt. Bill froze, his breath coming quick and shallow. The riders came into view, two men, both strangers, their coats dusty, their hats pulled low. One was thick-set, with a bristling mustache and a badge glinting at his chest. The other was lean, his eyes cold and sharp, a Pinkerton man if ever I'd seen one. They dismounted slow, boots crunching in the gravel, and walked up the path with the easy confidence of men who expected to be obeyed. Ma wiped her hands on her apron, her face calm but her eyes hard. "Let me do the talking," she said, and stepped out onto the porch before any of us could move. I watched from the doorway, the sunlight slanting across the floor, the taste of fear thick in my mouth. The lawman tipped his hat, his voice polite but edged with steel. "Morning, ma'am. Sheriff Dugan. This here's Mr. Harlan, Pinkerton Agency. Mind if we ask you a few questions?" Ma didn't flinch. "You can ask, Sheriff. Don't mean I'll have answers." The Pinkerton smiled, thin and cold. "We're looking into a robbery in Jonesville. General store. Happened last night after closing. Folks say they saw 4 men riding out of town heading north. Thought maybe you'd seen something." Ma shook her head, her voice steady. "My boys were home last night. Supper, then chores. You're welcome to ask them yourself. The sheriff nodded, his eyes flicking past her to where we stood in the shadows. We'd like to if you don't mind. Frank stepped forward, his face calm, his voice even. We were here, Sheriff. Didn't leave the farm. Sim leaned against the door frame, arms crossed, a lazy smile on his lips. You think we'd be fool enough to rob the same town twice in a month? The Pinkertons' gaze lingered on Sim, cold and appraising. Sometimes fools get lucky, sometimes they get caught. Bill said nothing, his hands clenched at his sides, his knuckles white. I could see the sweat beading on his brow, the way his chest rose and fell too fast. The sheriff looked at each of us in turn, his eyes sharp. Anyone vouch for you? Ma's voice was like iron. I do. I keep a close house, Sheriff. My boys were here. There was a long silence, the air thick with the scent of bread and fear. The Pinkerton studied us, his eyes moving from face to face, searching for a crack, a tremor, a sign of guilt. I held his gaze, forcing myself to breathe slow, to keep my hands steady. Finally, he nodded, though I could see he wasn't convinced. We'll be around a few days. Don't go far. They turned and walked back to their horses, the sheriff's boots leaving muddy prints on the porch. I watched them ride away, the tension in my chest easing just a little, though I knew it was only a reprieve. Inside, Ma closed the door, her hands trembling now that the danger had passed. Frank let out a long breath, his shoulders sagging. Sim laughed, the sound brittle and sharp, but there was no real humor in it. Bill slipped away, disappearing into the orchard, his fear trailing behind him like a shadow. I stood in the kitchen, the taste of coffee and dread still on my tongue, and listened to the silence settle over the house. The law had come poking around, and I knew they'd be back. The world outside was bright and ordinary, but inside, we were all waiting for the next knock at the door, the next question, the next test of our lives. And as the afternoon wore on, the sun climbing higher, I realized that the real danger wasn't the law at the door, it was the fear inside us, growing with every secret, every stolen dollar, every lie we told to keep our family safe.
Thanks for riding along, partner. If you enjoyed this tale from the wild frontier, give us a like and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Until next time, keep your boots dusty and your aim true.